There is a man living beneath the floorboards of modern civilization. He is 40 years old, sick, spiteful, and unattractive. He is the prophet no one wanted. The voice Dostoevsky unleashed in 1864 to warn us about nihilism, utopianism, rational egoism, the death of God, and the coming century of blood. His name is the Underground Man, and almost everything he predicted has come true. Fyodor Dostoevsky published Notes from Underground at one of the strangest crossroads in European thought. Serfdom had just been abolished in Russia. The young intelligentsia was hungry for revolution. Science was beginning to claim it could explain everything, including the human soul. And in this atmosphere of intoxicating optimism, Dostoevsky did something unforgivable. He wrote a novel that refused to be optimistic. Notes from Underground is short, jagged, often unreadable in its first chapters, and yet Friedrich Nietzsche, when he later stumbled upon Dostoevsky in a nice bookshop, would write, Dostoevsky, the only psychologist from whom I've anything to learn, he ranks amongst the most beautiful strokes of fortune in my life. It is considered the first existentialist novel. It is also a satire, a confession, a philosophical hand grenade, and a desperate warning. To understand the warning, we must first walk into the world it was written against. In 1862, 2 years before Dostoevsky finished Notes from Underground, Ivan Turgenev published Fathers and Sons. In that novel, a young medical student named Bazarov introduced the Russian reading public to a strange new word, nihilism. A nihilist, Turgenev wrote, is a man who does not bow down before any authority, who does not take any principle on faith, whatever reverence that principle may be enshrined in. For Bazarov, religion, art, family, beauty, love, tradition, all of it was sentimental nonsense to be cleared away so that science and reason could finally build something true. The novel was an enormous scandal, and it lit a fire under the younger generation who began to call themselves, proudly, nihilists. But this Russian nihilism was not merely the skepticism we associate with the word today. It mutated quickly into a positive program. Its dominant social philosophy became rational egoism, the doctrine that we are only acting rationally when we act in our own self-interest. Combine this with the utilitarianism arriving from England, Jeremy Bentham's mathematical hedonic calculus, the idea that pleasure and pain can be measured, summed, and engineered, and you arrive at a vision of human life as a problem in arithmetic. Maximize the equation, minimize the suffering, reform the institutions, and humanity, finally, will be free. Dostoevsky saw this vision as a catastrophe waiting to happen. To glorify the self in the name of reason, he believed, would not produce enlightened citizens. It would produce monsters wearing the mask of philosophy. He famously summarized the rational egoist mindset in a single line, I say let the world go to hell, but I should always have my tea. That is the soul of the new man, civilized, calculating, willing to set the planet on fire so long as the kettle keeps boiling. After his trip across Europe, Dostoevsky concluded that the West had already been infected. He wrote that what dominates Western culture is a principle of individuality, a principle of isolation, intense self-preservation, of personal egoism, self-definition in terms of one's own I. In placing this I in opposition to all nature and all other people, as an autonomous, independent principle, completely equal and equally valuable to everything that exists outside it. In other words, the self had become a fortress, and the fortress was beginning to mistake itself for the whole world. Against this, Dostoevsky preached what he called a return to the soil: family, religion, personal responsibility, brotherly love. The conviction that the individual is only fully himself when he can sacrifice himself for the other, freely, without calculation, without reward. This self-sacrifice, Dostoevsky insisted, cannot be derived from rational egoism. No equation can produce it. It comes from somewhere reason cannot reach. The immediate target of Notes from Underground was a man named Nikolai Chernyshevsky. In 1863, while imprisoned in the Peter and Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg, Chernyshevsky wrote a novel called What Is to Be Done, and it became the Bible of the Russian radical movement. Lenin would later borrow its title for his own pamphlet and confess that Chernyshevsky's novel had changed him completely. What Is to Be Done rests on a simple Rousseauian assumption man is naturally good, but society corrupts him. Enlighten him as to his true interests, organize society according to reason and science, and humanity will glide into perfection. Chernyshevsky imagined this perfection as a crystal palace, an enormous transparent structure of iron and glass, modelled on the real Crystal Palace built for the Great Exhibition of 1851 in London. A symbol of total rationality, a society where suffering has been engineered out of existence, a heaven without God. In Chernyshevsky's novel, while one of the characters is rhapsodizing about the glories of rational egoism and the coming utopia, he turns and asks, mockingly, "Do you hear that in your underground hole?" 1 year later, from his underground hole, Dostoevsky answered. His answer was the underground man. We never learn his name. We learn that he is a 40-year-old retired civil servant. We learn that he lives in St. Petersburg, in a small, miserable room, which the original Russian text describes as a kind of crawl space, a place not really fit for a human being, where mice and roaches move freely through the walls. This is why he calls himself a mouse. But the underground, of course, is not really a room. It is a state of the soul. It is what happens to a man who has read too much, thought too much, isolated himself too much, and ended up unable to enter the world of action. It is the metaphor for the modern intellectual, alienated, hyperconscious, watching life through a crack in the floorboards. His opening words are among the most famous in world literature. I am a sick man, I am a spiteful man, I am an unattractive man. I believe my liver is diseased. No, I refuse to consult a doctor from spite. That you probably will not understand. My liver is bad. Well, let it get worse. Within 4 sentences, he has revised himself 3 times. He doesn't know what he is. He is talking to an imaginary audience he hates and needs in equal measure. He is performing, contradicting, retreating, and yet beneath the spite there is something terrifyingly lucid. He goes on to admit that he could never really become spiteful, that within himself he was always conscious of countless contrary impulses, swarming, craving expression, which he refused to release. They tormented him until he was sickened by himself. He is not a coherent character. He is a chaos of conflicting impulses in search of a face. And his entire confession is the record of that search. To survive this chaos, he retreats into books. He confesses that he could not speak except as though he were reading from one. He has replaced reality with literature, because reality, with its real bodies and real conflicts, is unbearable to a man who knows himself too well. And yet, occasionally, he produces observations of devastating accuracy. Every man has reminiscences which he would not tell to everyone, but only to his friends. He has other matters in his mind which he would not reveal even to his friends, but only to himself, and that in secret. But there are other things which a man is afraid to tell even to himself, and every decent man has a number of such things stored away in his mind. The more decent he is, the greater the number of such things in his mind. Dostoevsky uses the underground man to draw a distinction that will run through the entire novel, the distinction between the man of action and the man of acute consciousness. The man of action is direct, simple, and a little stupid. When he wants something, he charges at it like a bull, horns down. He does not pause to interrogate his own motives. He does not suspect his suspicions. He acts. and the underground man envies him with a hatred bordering on worship. To illustrate the predicament of the conscious man, Dostoevsky introduces one of his most famous images, the stone wall. The stone wall is the law of nature, the result of scientific reasoning, the iron fact that 2 times 2 makes 4. The man of action, when he encounters the stone wall, accepts it. He cannot break it. He turns around. He gets on with his life. But the underground man, the man of acute consciousness, refuses. He stands at the wall and batters his head against it, fully aware that he lacks the strength to knock it down, fully aware of the futility of his actions, and still he refuses to be reconciled to it. Of course I cannot break through the wall by battering my head against it if I really have not the strength to knock it down, he writes. But I am not going to be reconciled to it simply because it is a stone wall and I have not the strength. As though such a wall really were a consolation, this is the key. The wall is the truth, but truth is not consolation. The fact that something is rational does not make it bearable. The fact that a thing must be does not make a free man bow before it. And so the conscious man chooses, against his own interests, to bleed against the wall, simply because the wall offends him. The result of this collision is paralysis. The underground man tells us he could become nothing, neither spiteful nor kind, neither a rascal nor an honest man, neither a hero nor an insect. He lives out his days in his corner, taunting himself with what he calls the spiteful and useless consolation that an intelligent man cannot become anything seriously, and it is only the fool who becomes anything. The man of action becomes a general, a husband, a citizen. The conscious man becomes a question mark. To think too much, Dostoevsky tells us, is a disease. And yet the underground man is also vain. He believes himself intellectually superior to every person he meets. He despises them. But he also cannot rest until they acknowledge his superiority, and when they ignore him, as they always do, he collapses into self-loathing at the disgrace of his dependence on them. He needs the recognition of the men he considers beneath him. This is the trap of modern consciousness. We have killed our gods and replaced them with the gaze of others, and the gaze of others is never satisfied. He calls himself a mouse, and the image is precise. He describes how the unfortunate mouse, after being insulted, retreats into its hole and there, in its nasty, stinking underground home, becomes absorbed in cold, malignant, and above all everlasting spite. For 40 years it will remember its injury down to the smallest, most ignominious details, and every time it remembers, it will add fresh details of its own invention, spitefully teasing and tormenting itself with its own imagination. This is the masterpiece of the conscious man. He does not simply suffer his humiliations, he elaborates them, he composes them, he sets them to music in the dark. And then comes the twist that places Dostoevsky among the greatest psychologists of the modern age. The underground man confesses that in this state of despair, dissatisfaction, and hopelessness, he finds pleasure. He admits that consciousness is a curse, but a curse that is the precondition of freedom. Without consciousness, there is no suffering. Without suffering, there is no free will. To be a free man is to bear the wound of thinking. The animal does not suffer in this way. The piano key does not suffer at all. He describes the pleasure of a toothache, the cultivated moan that disturbs his family in the next room, his sadistic enjoyment of their suffering at his suffering. He describes coming home on the foulest nights of Petersburg, conscious of some dastardly action he had committed that day, nagging himself, worrying himself, accusing himself, until the bitterness turned into what he calls a shameful, damnable sweetness, and finally into real, positive delight. Delight because he was so intensely aware of his own degradation. This is the masochism of the modern self. We have built an entire literature an entire art form, an entire industry on this very mechanism. What does he do with his time? He invents adventures for himself. He makes up a life so as at least to live in some way. He takes offense on purpose, knowing he is taking offense on purpose, until he has worked himself into being genuinely offended at nothing. Boredom, that minor demon of the modern soul, drives him to manufacture his own dramas. The conscious man cannot stop. He cannot stop thinking, he cannot stop performing, he cannot stop suffering. And he cannot stop enjoying the suffering he is performing for an audience that is not even there. But the underground man is not only diagnosing himself, he is diagnosing us. And here we reach the core of Dostoevsky's warning. The rational egoist promises a world in which man, once enlightened, will infallibly act in his own best interest. The utilitarian promises that pleasure can be maximized and pain minimized by correct calculation. Chernyshevsky promises the crystal palace. And the underground man asks one simple, devastating question. What are you going to do with the millions of facts that bear witness to the opposite? What about all the human beings who, fully understanding their real interests, have left them in the background and rushed headlong down another path to meet peril and danger? What if a man's advantage sometimes consists in desiring what is harmful to himself? What if there is something in the human heart that prefers ruin to a programmed paradise? Man, the underground man insists, is not a rational animal. The best definition of man is the ungrateful biped. Glance at the whole history of the world, he says, and you may say anything about it that the most disordered imagination can produce. The only thing one cannot say about it is that it is rational. And so, given the chance to enter the Crystal Palace, man will, sooner or later, raise his fist and smash a window. Not because the palace is unjust, because the palace is finished, because there is nothing left to do inside it. Because in a world where everything has been calculated, the one thing a man still owns, the one thing he can still call his, is the right to defy the calculation. This, Dostoevsky tells us, is man's most advantageous advantage. It does not fit in any system. It is the caprice for which a man will sacrifice happiness, health, prosperity, and security, simply in order to preserve his personality, his individuality, the feeling that he is still a he and not a function. He imagines a scenario. In the midst of general prosperity, in the crystal palace of the future, with all problems solved and all needs met, a gentleman with an ignoble and ironical countenance arises and says, "I say, gentlemen, hadn't we better kick over the whole show and scatter rationalism to the winds, simply to send these logarithms to the devil, and to enable us to live once more at our own sweet foolish will?" And the underground man assures us that this gentleman would find followers. Such is the nature of man. Notice what Dostoevsky is not saying. He is not attacking reason. He is attacking the worship of reason. He is attacking the reduction of human life to a mathematical formula. Reason, in his view, accounts for perhaps 1/20th of our nature. The rest is impulse, desire, conscience, faith, terror, love, all of them forming a realm wider than logic and closer to who we actually are. A person always and in every way prefers to act in the way he feels like acting, and not in the way that reason and interest dictate. Shower upon man every earthly blessing, the underground man writes. Drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity, such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species, and even out of sheer ingratitude, sheer spite. Man would play you some nasty trick, simply in order to prove to himself, as though that was so necessary, that men still are men, and not the keys of a piano, which the laws of nature threaten to control so completely that soon one will be able to desire nothing but by the calendar. This is the line on which all of Dostoevsky's prophecy rests. Man is not a piano key. He will not be played. He will play himself, even out of tune, even into chaos, even into self-destruction, simply to prove that he is the one with the hands. And if you tell him that this too can be predicted, that his caprice can be tabulated, that even his rebellion can be foreseen and absorbed into the system, then, Dostoevsky writes, he will go mad on purpose, just to be free of you. He will declare that 2 times 2 equals 5. He will burn down the laboratory. He will love what destroys him, simply to escape the future you have planned for him. Dostoevsky had seen this firsthand. In the prison camp at Omsk, where he had served 4 years of hard labor for belonging to a circle of liberal intellectuals, he had watched fellow prisoners, men who had endured years of silence and obedience, suddenly erupt into senseless violence, hurling themselves into punishment they knew would destroy them. He described these eruptions as the poignant hysterical craving for self-expression, the unconscious yearning for himself, the desire to assert himself, to assert his crushed person, a desire which suddenly takes possession of him and reaches the pitch of fury, of spite, of mental aberration, of fits and nervous convulsions. A man, when reduced too long to a function, will explode into chaos simply to remember that he is a man. This is why the underground man asks his most disturbing question. Man, he says, passionately loves to build roads, to create, to construct. This is beyond dispute. But why, then, does he also passionately love destruction and chaos? Why does the same species that builds cathedrals also dynamite them? Perhaps, he suggests, man is instinctively afraid of finishing his edifice. Perhaps he loves the building from a distance but does not want to live in it. Perhaps he loves only the process, the striving, the becoming, and dreads the moment when there is nothing left to strive toward. Perhaps man is, fundamentally, a comical creature, and there is a kind of jest at the bottom of him. The Crystal Palace, then, is not a destination he will accept. It is a future he will sabotage. I rejected the Crystal Palace myself, he writes, for the sole reason that one would not be allowed to stick out one's tongue at it. In the perfect society, the small, defiant, ridiculous gesture of mockery would be the highest crime. And without that gesture, man is no longer man. Man, Dostoevsky concludes, is sometimes extraordinarily, passionately in love with suffering. We want happiness, and we have a special talent for ruining it. Man is like a chess player who loves the game, but not the checkmate. The end of suffering would be, paradoxically, the end of meaning. To abolish suffering is to abolish the soul. And so the question with which the underground man leaves us is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a knife. Which is better, he asks, cheap happiness or sublime suffering? Well, come on, which is better? Dostoevsky did not live to see his prophecy confirmed. He died in 1881, but within a generation of his death, the program he had warned against was being implemented across 1/6 of the earth. Marx had inherited from the Russian radicals their faith in reason, in materialism, in the engineering of paradise. Lenin, who had memorized Chernyshevsky in his youth, set out to build the Crystal Palace by force. Stalin perfected the architecture. The 20th century became the bloodiest in human history, not because men had abandoned reason, but because they had worshipped it as a god, and a god jealous of all rivals. Tens of millions died in the name of a future that had been calculated in advance and would tolerate no caprice. In Demons, Dostoevsky had already sketched the next stage of the disease, the political nihilist who, having lost God, decides he must replace him, and ends by murdering his friends for the sake of an idea. As Hegel had observed, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. And our age has confirmed it. The dream of engineered paradise has not died with the gulags. It has only changed its vocabulary. It now speaks of progress, of optimization, of metrics, of behavioral design, of nudges, of algorithms that know us better than we know ourselves. The new crystal palaces are not made of glass, they are made of data. And the underground man, with his sick liver and his unrepentant spite, still presses his face against the wall and refuses to come in. Dostoevsky believed that the only force capable of saving man from this fate was not reason, but faith. Not the worship of the human mind, but the surrender of the human mind to something greater than itself. He believed that man was innately irrational, capricious, destructive, and that only Christ, only the freely chosen self-sacrifice modelled on Christ, could give the chaos of the human heart a form that did not end in blood. Whether or not we share his faith, we cannot ignore that his diagnosis has outlived every utopia raised against it. The underground man is still down there. He is in every one of us who has lain awake at 3 a.m, rehearsing a humiliation from 20 years ago. He is in every act of self-sabotage we cannot explain. He is in every moment where we choose the wound over the cure, the chaos over the calm, the foolish gesture over the rational plan. He is the part of us that refuses to be a piano key. He is the part of us that, for reasons no calculator will ever capture, declares against all evidence that 2 times 2 equals 5, and finds, in that absurd declaration, the last proof that we are still free. Dostoevsky did not write Notes from Underground to celebrate this man. He wrote it to warn us about him and to warn us about the world that produced him, a world that worships reason without wisdom, freedom without responsibility, the self without the soul. A world that promises paradise and delivers the underground. He is, in the end, the patron saint of every age that believes it has finally solved the human problem. And the lesson he leaves us is the lesson Dostoevsky carried out of Siberia and into his greatest novels, that man is not an equation, that suffering is not a malfunction, that the soul cannot be optimized, and that any system, however gleaming, however rational, however well-intentioned, that forgets these things will sooner or later hear a voice rising from beneath its floorboards. A voice that is sick. A voice that is spiteful. A voice that refuses to consult a doctor from spite. A voice that, if we are wise enough to listen, may still save us from ourselves.